And we are live. Welcome back to today's national weather forecast. Once again, we've got lots to talk about. The big story is that cold Arctic air that you can see is still sitting over Texas and Oklahoma. But there's some good news. The end is in sight starting on Friday, and then for the next 2 weeks, it's just going to continue to warm up throughout the entire eastern half of the country. The other big stories we're going to be talking about are that big winter storm that's now pushing through West Virginia and Virginia, and then is going to work its way up into the northeast throughout the day today. Also down in Texas, we have another snowstorm happening. It's actually the trailing effects of that larger storm there. And then as well, we have another storm coming in the Pacific Northwest that we're going to dive into as well. And if that wasn't enough, we also have some flood and even a tornado threat down here in the southeast. So lots to talk about. So if you're only interested in one of these regions, you can go down into the comments below where I put the timestamps, and you'll be able to click directly to the region that you're interested in. Also, I always say this, you should make sure this is my most recent forecast, because just as you'll see in this video, the forecast models have changed even since yesterday, and it's most likely going to happen again tomorrow. So with weather, you always want to stay updated with the most current information. So the best place to start out, I always think, is just looking at the warnings map, because this paints a big picture of where the most extreme weather is happening. You see, we have winter storm advisories up here in the Pacific Northwest, the storm we're going to be talking about there, but then the real action is going on in the south and working into the eastern half of the country, where we have winter storm warnings associated with that snowstorm in Texas we'll be diving into, stretching all the way up through Tennessee, through West Virginia and Virginia, all the way up into Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And some of the big cities in the Northeast look like they're going to be getting some decent snowfall with this. As well, you can see that flood threat there in Georgia and South Carolina, where we're getting heavy rain. That's where the temperatures are a little bit warmer, so instead of getting snow and ice, you get that heavy rain. And there's even a tornado watch. So if you live in that area right there, be sure to stay updated with your local resources when it comes to that tornado watch there. So it's also helpful to look at the winter storm severity index, because this shows you how big a storm actually is going to be. It's easy to get carried away and think every single storm is a huge storm. So I always like to look at this because it puts it into perspective how big a storm actually is. For example, that system pushing through the west, you can see for the most part, it's just having limited impacts. And then there's a very narrow strip where there's moderate to major impacts, especially up here in the northern Cascades, where we could actually get 1 to 2 feet of snow in that area. But that's not as highly populated, and they're used to this kind of weather, so that's why that's just, for the most part, a normal winter storm up there. Where it's not a winter storm is down here in Texas. You can see that's where we have major and extreme impacts, because you rarely get snowstorms this far south, and the snowfall totals are actually looking like they'll be to 6 inches, possibly even more, throughout the day today. And then when we go over to this storm that's now working its way into the northeast, the one we're now calling Winter Storm Viola, or at least the Weather Channel is, you can see that does have some moderate impacts throughout North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then some major impacts in Virginia. And we'll have to keep our eye out if those major impacts there are because of snow or because of ice. If I had to guess right now, I would say that's most likely due to the ice, because as we've seen with this storm, as it first started off in Texas, caused all those power outages, and is now moving up here, ice has been one of the biggest factors. One, it makes your roadways dangerous, and two, when all that ice piles up on the power lines, it can take them down, and as we saw in Texas, it can actually freeze up the machinery in the power facilities, which caused all the power outages down there. So, as always, my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone in Texas who is still being affected by this storm that, as you can see, is still going on. Now, as I said, that little bit of the storm down here in Texas is the trailing aspect of that major storm that's now moving up there. So if we just click through here, we can see that there is some good news. One, that storm in Texas isn't going to last too long. Looks like it's already gone by tonight and even tomorrow morning. And then the other good news, as I'll show you in a second, is all those freezing cold temperatures look like they'll finally start easing up in the next few days. Today is still going to be quite cold in Texas. Tomorrow is going to be a bit better, and then it seems to just be improving throughout the next 2 weeks until we finally get above average. But looking at here, this basically paints your picture of what's going on. The main thing I'm worried about, possibly in this entire forecast, is right there. That ice that could be building into Virginia and North Carolina throughout this morning, right now, into this afternoon, and even into this evening as well. So we'll really look at where that ice is going to be falling, how much. In some cases, it looks like it could be over a half an inch, which is certainly dangerous for our roadways. And then in West Virginia, Northern Virginia, working into Pennsylvania and New Jersey, that's where we start to have some pretty decent snow accumulations, over 6 to 8 inches. Some places possibly getting 10 inches. But as you'll see as I click through here, the big thing we've been talking about all week long is what was that low going to do when it came off the Virginia coast. Because if it goes right along the coastline here, then the entire Northeast gets 10 inches or a foot of snow. But as you can see, the models have it pulling off a little bit farther into the Atlantic, getting close enough to bring some of the more coastal cities some decent snowfall, over 6 inches, but not the widespread heavy snowfall that would have happened if this low was hugging the coast. That's what we've been watching all week long, and as of right now, it looks like it's close enough to give us snow, but not so close that it's going to be a major winter storm. And then, like I mentioned, in the west, we have that new system starting its push into the Pacific Northwest throughout the day today, and then lasting throughout Friday. And then after that, it looks like there's just an endless number of storms that are going to continue to push into Washington there. So it's always helpful just to look at the broad view of where all the precipitation is going to fall. This is showing where the rain, for the most part, is going to fall. You can see Georgia and South Carolina are our key places to watch. Possibly 3 to maybe even 4 inches in that region. We also have heavy rain and even the tornado threat down there in Florida. So those are the key spots that we have to look out when it comes to that flood concern. And as you saw earlier, that was on the warnings map. And then we also have to look at the Washington, Oregon, and California coast, where we have that heavy rain as well, especially between the Oregon and California border. The one theme of this storm pushing through the west is that it's a very northern storm. Washington has the greatest effects, and just the very tip of California is getting a taste of some of those higher rainfall and snowfall totals. When we look at the snowfall totals, actually I'll back that up because it's pretty interesting to watch that storm spread out from where it's dropping some heavy snow early this morning in Tennessee and very northern parts of Alabama, stretching up, dropping heavy snow into West Virginia and Virginia, and then up into the Northeast. And that perfectly explains what I was just trying to show on that other map, where the heaviest snowfall accumulations are falling off into the Atlantic because the low is a bit farther off the coast than original models were showing. So the Northeast still does get some snow, and some coastal cities do get at least 6 inches, maybe 8 inches, but for the most part, the heaviest snowfall is being dropped in the Atlantic. And then we've also got that snowfall down there in Texas. That's one of our main concerns today. I'd say the two main concerns are that ice in Virginia and North Carolina, and then that snowfall in Texas, where we do have some extreme impacts expected. And then, like always, the Northwest is just constantly picking up snowfall, especially Washington, where we should be picking up a foot or 2 feet over the next week as storm after storm just continues to go through that region. So what I was just saying, my big concern is most likely the ice. It was falling in Mississippi this morning. Texas and Louisiana had the worst of it yesterday. Now that ice is spreading up throughout the country and unfortunately dropping some pretty significant totals. That's about a half an inch to even more than a half an inch of ice buildup right there. And it really only takes a tenth of an inch for your roadways to get dangerous. So at this point, that's where that ice can start piling up on your power lines and possibly lead to some outages as well as travel concerns. So that's the key spot I'm worried about now. It was falling for the most part in Mississippi this morning. So all of that ice that we were just showing, there's a reason it's falling as far south as Mississippi on that map. And it's because of this cold Arctic air. That's what's been allowing all that ice in Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi, the snowstorm in Texas today, all the power outages in Texas throughout this week. That was because of this Arctic blast of cold air. And this seems to be a story I've been talking about for about 2 weeks now, when it first started coming into Montana. And it seems like for the last 2 weeks, somewhere in the center of the country, going from north to south, has been 35 to 45 degrees below average temperatures. So that means you're likely below freezing, and then in some cases below zero. And then when you factor in the wind chill, that's where you get to the point where it feels like it's negative 50 degrees below zero, and where you actually have wind chill warnings where frostbite can happen in 10 minutes. It's been a cold 2 weeks, I'll put it that way. There is good news. As we click through the day today, you can see, unfortunately, this is still the bad news. Throughout the day today, we are still 25 to 40 degrees below average, especially through Texas and the central parts of the country, even working into the Midwest a little bit. And that's going to continue through Friday, but you'll notice these numbers starting to drop down on Friday. Instead of 40 degrees below average, we drop down to 30. And then from 30, we drop down to 25, and then to 20, and then eventually, as we get into this weekend and the weekend, we start seeing some above average temperatures return to the United States, especially the eastern half of the country and the northern parts of the country where those cold temperatures have been so extreme. And it's great to see it in Texas as well, because that's where the effects of the cold have been so, you could say the word devastating. This has been quite a last week when it comes to that cold weather. But the good news is, as we get into this time next week, basically the entire eastern half of the country is above average, and you can see that cold air is actually transitioned to the west. So if we want to actually see what those temperatures are, not just how far off you are from the average, which is what I was just showing, let's actually look at the temperatures themselves. And I'm going to focus on Texas here, because that seems to be where the worst of these cold temperatures are right now, where we're still 35 degrees below average, and where there's still large numbers of people who don't have electricity, which means they can't turn their heaters on. That is one of my big concerns throughout this forecast. And again, there's good news. There's a silver lining. This cold air is not going to last all that much longer. If we get into the daytime high today, you can see majority of Texas is still below freezing. So it's still going to be cold today, although if you need a silver lining, even though that certainly doesn't look like anything to be happy about, it wasn't too long ago that portions of Texas were actually below zero, and large portions were in the teens. It looks like for the most part we're hovering right around the high 20s to the low 30s. And then if we look at tomorrow's high, you can see it already is starting to warm up. It's still cold. We're still below freezing in some areas, especially eastern Texas here, where we had that bad ice yesterday morning. But for the most part, it's warming up. Part of the state is already above that freezing line, which is 32 degrees. And then we'll just continue the good news. As we get into Saturday, almost the entire state is out of those below freezing categories. The easiest way to look at this map, I probably should have said this earlier, is where there's that blue color, that means you're below freezing. Where it's green, that means you're above freezing. So now that you know that, I'll just go back. That's today. Almost everyone in that blue color, which means below freezing. And then tomorrow, a little bit more above freezing. Saturday, almost the entire state above freezing. And then when we get into Sunday, the trend just continues. We could just keep doing this all day long. Monday into Tuesday, Don't worry about those numbers. You are certainly not going to be negative 460 degrees. Not sure what's going on with the model there, but the color is still correct. You're going to start actually returning to some normal temperatures. If you want to see just a snapshot of what your temperatures will look like 6 days from now to 10 days from now. So this is the average. You can see most of Texas returning to just normal temperatures for this time of year. Up in Minnesota, we're actually returning to above average temperatures. That's got to be very welcomed up there because that's one of the places where wind chills were getting as cold as negative 40 to negative 50 at some points in the last 2 weeks. Montana, you're going to be happy to see you're now mild again, which is great there because that's one of those spots as well that had negative 20 to negative 40 degree temperatures. And then that cold air is actually pushing into the northwest, which makes sense when we think about those 5 different storms that we're going to be talking about that are pushing in there. Now, that might be enough good news, but it actually gets even better. As we look at the averages for 8 days to 14 days, so 8 days out to 14 days out, this is the average of all your temperatures. The entire eastern half of the country is above average temperatures, including down here in Texas. So I'm sure there's a lot of recovery efforts that need to be done. The good news is, as of right now, the forecast is looking like you'll have the warm weather to do it. And then especially up here in the northern states, still well above average, while the northwest and almost the entire western half of the country, well, western third, goes to those below average temperatures. So just to sum that all up, we've got that storm coming into the west, actually a number of storms coming into the west. We'll take a quick look at that. We have the snowstorm down here in Texas, and then that winter storm warning stretching all the way from Texas all the way up into Pennsylvania as what is now being called Winter Storm Viola moves through West Virginia and Virginia, dropping large amounts of snow and ice there, snow building up into the northeast, and then below that, where the temperatures are above freezing, we have a flood threat down here in Georgia and even a tornado watch down here in Florida. So lots going on in the forecast. I think the best place to start would just be with those storms in the west. I always like to start in the west because for the most part, weather moves from west to east. For example, yesterday we were mostly talking about Texas, and today the biggest concerns are here in West Virginia and Virginia because that storm moved from Texas. So we'll start over here in the west, where you'll notice throughout the day today, actually should be happening in the next hour or two, that storm is going to start pushing into Washington, Oregon, and the very northern parts of California. So the theme with that one is it's a very northern storm. Washington gets the greatest impacts, Oregon's kind of that Goldilocks zone, and then the very northern parts of California just get the tail end of it. And then that's going to move through, and then right behind that, we've got another one that should be coming in on Sunday. So let's just look at it on this map because it's sometimes the easiest way to see a storm moving in. You can see how this works. It moves right through Washington first right there, and then it spreads down into Oregon, and then just brushes the very northern parts of California, and then moves through. So it looks like SoCal is going to be completely missing out on this one. So that moves through, and then let's see if we can see that second one come through. It looks like the second one was actually just the trail end of that first system. It was coming through early Sunday morning. Yeah, maybe just the trail end right there. So we'll just focus on the first one from now on. So looking in there, that's about 1 p.m. today. We're going to start to see that snow and rain build in. Rain along the coast where your temperatures are moderated by the warmer ocean, relatively speaking. And then some heavy coast building into Northern California and Oregon. That snow building into Washington and almost the entire eastern half of Oregon. Throughout tonight and into tomorrow morning, that snow is going to spread out into Idaho and Montana, then eventually into Utah and Wyoming. The key spot to watch here, though, is up here in Washington, where throughout the entire lifetime of that storm, we just continue to see heavy snowfall there. And then there's that second little blast from the system. It looks like the second edge. Actually, it makes sense when you think about it. We'll go back to this map right here. As this storm comes through, you see it just is hitting Washington and Oregon, and then at the very end of it, it dips down right here. So that actually matches up perfectly with what's being shown on this graphic, where at this point, this is where that trough has dipped down, and now it's actually California and the Oregon border getting the greatest effects. That was something I didn't notice earlier, but it actually does perfectly explain why that little blast at the end is mostly for Northern California and this very southwestern tip of Oregon. So if we want to just take a quick look at the snowfall that we're going to get with this storm that's clicking through by Sunday, that's when the storm has officially moved out. Looks like parts of the northern Cascades in Washington could be getting 2 to 3 feet of snow with this. And it's actually a perfect gradient here to explain what I was trying to articulate earlier. It's a very northern storm. We have the most effects right up here in northern Washington, where we could get 2 to 3 feet of snow. Down here in Oregon in the Cascades, over a foot of snow, maybe a foot and a half. And then down here in California, maybe 8 to 12 inches of snow if we're lucky. And it's just the very northern parts. So it just is a perfect gradient of most extreme impacts up here and then stretching down, easing out as it moves down the west coast. So it makes sense to focus on where the impacts are the greatest. The first little bits of this storm should actually start coming in right up, doing a forecast early today. So in about an hour, that's when that snow is going to be building in to Washington, and then it's going to fill in throughout the day. By 4 p.m., the storm has arrived, and then that heavy snow continues to fall in the very northern parts of the state. It looks like Friday morning, that's where that second wave of the system comes through. That's where you get your heaviest snowfall throughout Washington. Looks like 0.1 to 0.2 inches per hour. That's where you're going to be waking up to some good snow early Friday morning. And then if you keep your eye on the coastline the entire time, just continued rain coverage, while the Cascades through Washington seem to be in snow for quite some time, even till that next system shows up. So that's why the accumulations are going to be so great there. So that's 10 p.m. on Sunday. We're not going to spend too long focusing on this one because it's ways off in the forecast, but looks like we have another system pushing in 10 p.m. Sunday that might even be bigger than this one that's pushing in today. So we'll have to keep our eye on that as we move forward in the forecast. Just to get a snapshot of the total snowfall that we're going to be looking at, with just this first system, we'll ignore that second one for now, that is about 2 to 3 feet of snow in the very northern Cascades. And then you can see throughout the coast, and even this one little bullseye right here, that could be getting 1 to 2 feet right there. But for the most part, the coast is where you're getting your rainfall. Now, I did mention the storm will be stretching down into California, but just the very northern parts will be feeling it. It's going to start moving in the next hour or two, and then that heavy rain builds in along the coast throughout the day today between 10 and 4 p.m., and then it's going to quickly just kind of die down and spread out. Bay Area should start getting some rain by tonight, working into tomorrow morning. And Sierras get a little bit of snow here near Tahoe, but certainly not as much as we've seen with some of the storms that passed directly over us. Now, let's see if we can keep our eye out for that second burst. That's about 10 p.m. on Friday. That's when that trough dips back down. That looks like it looks like that's going to be the time where the impacts are the greatest in California, where we have 0.2 to 0.5 inches of rain building in per hour along the coast, and then some heavy snowfall building in the northern parts of the state. Just like that first wave of the system, that's going to spread out into the Bay Area. Central Coast is about as far as it's going to get. Think the SoCal area is missing out on this. And then Tahoe and parts of the Sierras get a little bit more snow with that second blast of the system, as you can actually see that low right there. So that's as it's dipped down and then it's pulling down through the state. That's why we get some heavy snow at around 4 a.m. on Saturday. But then by 10 a.m. and then throughout the day Saturday, looks like we're in the clear and not feeling that second little blast that was pushing through Washington. So let's see how much snowfall in total That's the first part of the system where it's mostly up here in Northern California, getting possibly a foot in a very select location. And then with that second blast of the system, that's where we are able to pile up some heavier snowfall here near Tahoe, but it doesn't look like much. It's just your average winter storm, maybe even a little bit below average, especially compared to some of the ones we've had this season, but it's something. We'll be getting maybe 6 to 8 inches there. So this basically sums up what I was just saying. Limited impacts overall with this system. Excuse me. Limited impacts throughout most of the Northwest. The one spot that does have some moderate to possibly even some extreme impacts is up here in very northern Washington, where we saw we could be getting 2 to 3 feet of snow. Down here, by the time it stretches all the way to California, that's where it's limited to minor impacts. So we'll keep our eye on it. Forecasts change every day, but as of right now, it just looks like your average winter storm. And then we'll have to keep our eye on that second one, because that one looks like it might actually be the bigger of the two. Now, while the West is seeing just your average storm and something that typically happens throughout the season multiple times, this is a story that is very abnormal. This is not your average winter weather in Texas. Yesterday we had an ice storm that dropped over 1/2 inch of ice throughout eastern Texas, and today we're having a snowstorm that could drop 6 to 8 inches near San Antonio. So as we click in here, you can actually see where those impacts are expected. You can see stretching over San Antonio, and then right here is where we're going to have the bullseye of the greatest snow accumulation, over 6 to 8 inches in Texas. And again, that's all because of that cold Arctic air that's still sitting over the region, but on the bright side, as I've explained, is going to be easing over the next few days, and by next week this time, we're actually going to be above average throughout Texas. But right there is what we do have to focus on, because that's major to extreme impacts showing up on this map. That's where they're actually expecting there to be property damage. That's where safety can become a concern. So that is a key spot to watch out for. And it's kind of hard to tell on this map why there's going to be a snowstorm right here, but it's actually the trailing effects of the storm that you can see is now moving through Tennessee and then West Virginia later today. It's actually the trailing effects of that system that Texas was feeling yesterday. You can see that snowfall show up right there, and it looks like there's a little trough right there stretching all the way up. I have a better map to show that in a second, and then that snow is going to continue throughout the day today. Here's the better map to explain how this is working. This giant trough, that's the same thing that was bringing all that ice to Texas yesterday, and Louisiana and Mississippi as well. Now that trough is stretching all the way up and impacting Tennessee and West Virginia and Virginia. But it's this very trailing part where you can see that cold air still dipping down, and where we still have enough moisture from the Gulf of Mexico streaming in, that right there is where we're going to have our snowstorm, the very bottom edge of that trough. So if we want to take a more local look, first you can see early this morning some of that last ice building into Mississippi, and then there's that snowfall. It's going to start, actually it was already starting this morning, so you probably woke up to some snowfall in this area, and it's going to continue throughout the day. By tonight, it should start to ease up a little bit, but by tonight, you're going to have some decent accumulations down there. If we want to actually check out the timing, especially around San Antonio, where some of the impacts are expected, right there, you notice that's where you have your heaviest snowfall rates. That's where the extreme impacts are expected. That's 6 a.m. Thursday. So this is what was already falling. As we get into 12 p.m., you can see it's continuing to fall. And then as we get into 6 p.m., that coverage of snowfall just continues to shrink. But by this point in time, it will have been able to do some pretty decent accumulations of snowfall. So just to show it again, that's where we have those major impacts and the extreme impacts, right where we're going to see that total accumulated snowfall and the greatest totals on this map right here. So right there, that's where we could be getting 6 inches in that bullseye, and then as you spread out, 1 to 2 inches of snow. So it's easy to just say, oh, it's going to be a 6 to 8 inch snowstorm, but as you can see, the actual area getting 6 to 8 inches is rather small, and then there's a widespread area that's 1 to 2 inches. The reason this is considered a major storm, it's you might not think it is because we're just talking about Washington that's going to have 2 feet of snow and it's just a moderate storm. And then this is 2 inches of snow and it's considered a major storm. It's because this is very abnormal. This kind of thing doesn't happen often. So all the infrastructure and people in Washington are used to this kind of weather. It's part of their daily lives. So the impacts aren't as extreme because the impacts are the average is what I'm trying to say. Down here in Texas, this is rare. So that's why the impacts on this map right here have it as major and extreme. So again, the only reason this is possible and the reason this is so rare is because of this cold Arctic air that has been sitting over Texas for about a week. It was sitting over Montana through Minnesota last week, where we have temperatures 35 to 40 degrees below average. And you can see throughout the day today, it's still over Texas. And even getting into Friday tomorrow, it's still stretching from Texas into Illinois and Indiana, where we're still 35 to even 45 degrees below average in some places. So that might not seem, that is the bad news of the forecast. The bad news is today and tomorrow, we're still going to be quite cold throughout this area. The good news is, as we move forward in the forecast, just a constant trend starting really a couple days ago through today, the next day, it's going to just continually get closer and closer to average, and then eventually actually switch back to above average temperatures. You can see by this time next week, that same spot in Texas that currently is 35 degrees below average is soon going to be 15 degrees above average. So I'm sure everybody throughout this area sees this map right here, and it's got to bring some positivity and hope knowing that there's warm air on the horizon. So that was just showing the averages, how far off your temperatures are from what is normal. It might be even more useful to actually look at the temperatures themselves. So we'll focus on Texas here again. We did this earlier in the video, but this might be the biggest story today, considering large numbers of people throughout Texas don't have power, which means this cold air, they're actually having to feel it because they can't turn their heaters on. So I really want to spend some good time talking about this cold air over Texas because it is currently still there and there are currently still a large number of people without power. As you can see, majority of Texas is still in those below freezing temperatures. So just to remind you, when looking at this map, it's hard to see the numbers sometimes. So just easy way to tell, the blue color is where you're below freezing, below 32 degrees. The green color is where you're above freezing. So you can see throughout the day today, your daytime highs, we're going to be looking at the highs here. Your daytime highs are all below freezing throughout basically all of Texas. But then some good news starts to come in tomorrow. Looking at the daytime highs, just the northeastern part of Texas is still below freezing, as well as where we're getting that snowfall today. And then some of the temperatures start to creep into the mid-30s to even the mid-40s. Now by Saturday, that trend is going to continue. Some areas, actually large portions of Texas, will now be around 50 degrees, and almost nobody is still below freezing temperatures. As we get into Sunday, almost everybody is either in the mid-40s or the 50s, even some 60s. I know that's got to be great to see in this area, which is one of the areas we've had the most ice in the last couple of days. So Sunday gets even warmer, and then that trend is going to continue for the next 2 weeks until you're 15 degrees above average temperatures. So today and Friday still look like they'll be cold, but then Saturday, Sunday, and then for the next 2 weeks, things are looking up. So let's just go back here real quick and talk about this storm in general. Right there, you can see that trough digging down, and you can see where those below freezing temperatures are. That's what's allowing that snowstorm to occur down here in Texas. but it's also bringing impacts to the southeast here. You can see that perfect boundary between where there's below freezing and above freezing temperatures. Well, where we're above freezing is where we're going to be getting the heavy rain. And that's another big story for the day today, that heavy rain that's going to be building into Georgia and South Carolina. And then there's even one tornado watch down here in Florida. And if you need an explanation for why this is, it's because as that low pressure system moves through Tennessee, then West Virginia, the entire time it's pulling in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So it's difficult to tell on this map, but there's moisture being pulled in. You can actually see it stretching into Georgia, which actually makes sense because that's where we're getting the most rain. So where that moisture gets pulled in, that's where your heaviest precipitation is going to be. That's early this morning. Mississippi had a large amount of ice. We spent a long time talking about that yesterday, but for the most part, that part of the forecast is done. Now we're focusing on that heavy rain that's going to be building into Georgia and South Carolina and some select regions in Florida as well. The exact timing of that looks like light rain started early this morning. Right about now, it's turning into heavy rain, and then that rain is going to continue throughout the day today. And then it looks like you're in the clear as we get into Friday night, early Saturday morning. Looking at a more local look, just to get the exact timing, 1 a.m. on Thursday, that light rain was coming in. Some of those 0.2 to 0.5 inches per hour of rain at about 7 a.m. today. And then 1 p.m., that's where still heavy rain over the state. And then you'll notice it straightens out, almost forms a strip right here, stretches all the way from North Carolina down into Florida. And then that, almost like a wave, that's going to move off the coast right throughout the day Friday, and by Friday night, it looks like it's gone. Looking at the totals with that system, you can see exactly what we're just talking about. Where that moisture is pushing in the most is where you get the most rainfall. Right in Florida here, where we're getting over 2 inches, throughout majority of Georgia, where we're getting 1 to 2 inches, and then throughout South Carolina, that large portion should see 2 inches as well. So just to show you what's expected because of all that, we have a flood watch throughout almost all of Georgia, stretching into South Carolina, and then there's that tornado watch. I'm not going to dive too far into that today because there's a lot to talk about. So when it comes to that tornado watch, I would suggest just going to your local resources to see what they have to say about that. But above this, right there, that's where we're above freezing. That's where you're not getting the snow and ice like in other parts of the country. That's where you're warm enough and where that moisture is being pulled in, where you get the heavy rainfall right there. So that's where there's a flood watch, slight risk for severe weather throughout all of Georgia, pushing into South Carolina throughout the day today. Now you can see where we're below freezing, a little bit farther above, where the temperatures are colder. That's where we have this winter storm watch stretching all the way from Texas into Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And early this morning, we were seeing the largest effects right here in Tennessee and Kentucky. And then throughout the next couple hours, it's going to be working into West Virginia and Virginia. If we want to see how that works, this actually perfectly matches that map right there. You can see right where this trough is. It's typically along the right side of a trough, right on that boundary right there, where you're going to have your most severe weather. And it actually makes sense when you look at the isobars. That means lines of constant pressure. It's these lines you see here. Where the lines are far apart, that basically means there's not much weather happening. Where it's close together, that's where you have strong gradients, where you get extreme winds, and then a lot of your extreme weather. So you can see that's where those lines are closest together. And watch as we move through, those lines actually tighten up as they go over West Virginia and Virginia, and then the whole system pushes up and into the northeast. So if we want to see that another way, right along that line is where you have your most severe weather, and then that's going to push up through West Virginia and Virginia, and then finally into the northeast. So I want to focus on this region right here because This, there's a lot of things I'm concerned about today. Concerned about the snow in Texas, concerned about the power outages in Texas, but I'm also concerned about the ice that you're going to see building in to Virginia and North Carolina. It actually started this morning, but it's going to continue throughout the day today. That quite possibly is my big concern for the forecast. I know I've said that a couple times, but I guess there's just a lot of concerns today. And then you can see in the northern parts of West Virginia, pushing into Pennsylvania, that's where we're getting the heavy snowfall because your temperatures are enough below freezing that you're getting snow instead of the ice. It's actually right on the boundary between those two. This is something we've talked about a lot this week because ice has been a big part of the story. The boundary between your snow and your rain is where you get ice like this. Now, the reason for that is because that's where the atmosphere is warm enough that your precipitation just falls as rain, and then the second it hits the surface, which is below freezing, it's called actually freezing rain for this reason, that rain hits the surface and freezes. And it's right in between that boundary that it happens. Down here, the surface isn't cold enough for it to freeze. Right here, it just falls as snow. Right in between is where you get the ice. And you can see that's going to spread up into northern Virginia throughout the day today, working into this afternoon and then this evening. And then on the very last effects of this storm, we're just going to be getting some light snow and then some rain along the coast. As you can see, the low pressure move off the coast right there. And that's a little sneak peek of one of the big stories we've been talking about all week of how close to the coast was that low going, how close of a path was that low going to take, because that determines how much snow the northeast gets. You can see it's pushing off into the Atlantic, but there are select cities in the northeast that will have some great accumulations with that low. So let's check out the timing. That was at 7 a.m. this morning. So hopefully you guys watched my forecast yesterday where we dove into this, because you probably woke up to some fairly dangerous roadways throughout Virginia and North Carolina. More southern places where you're above freezing, that's where you get the rain, and then the snow building into West Virginia. You can see that ice is going to continue to build up throughout the day today. This is getting into 1 p.m., even at 7 p.m. There's portions of Virginia that still have that ice. Heavy rain building into North Carolina. That snow sticks around in that same strip where it seems right here is constantly on that borderline between above freezing and below freezing. So that's why they're constantly getting that ice for the next couple of days. Let's just click it back here. The key time that I would have said to worry about was 7 a.m. this morning. That's already passed. So just looking at the future, I would just say if you're living in this strip right between North Carolina and Virginia, that's the key place you got to look out if you're driving and live in this area. And then let's actually look at when is this storm going to be gone. Looks like 7 p.m. on Friday. The last little traces of rain are moving out of North Carolina. The big thing I want to show here is where that ice is going to fall and how much is going to fall. Almost all of Virginia looks like it's covered in at least 1/10 of an inch of ice, stretching into North Carolina as well, where there's large portions of the northwestern part of the state that have at least 1/4 up to 1/2 an inch. Right there is the key spot that I'm going to be watching throughout the day today, because when you get 1/2 an inch of ice to even more, looking at our color bar down here, that might even be 0.75 inches of ice. When you get that, that's where, one, the roadways get dangerous, and then two, all that ice starts piling up on your power lines, and then they can actually become so heavy that you end up getting some outages, as we've seen as part of the problem in Texas the last couple of days. So right there, just to show it again, that strip between Virginia stretching down into North Carolina, I believe is one of the key spots to pay attention to in this forecast today. When we look at the snowfall that's going to be pushing in, by about 7 p.m. on Friday, that's when we identified that the storm was leaving. This is how much snow is still to fall. We've already gotten a little bit, but we're going to get another 2 to 4 inches throughout West Virginia. Very select portions getting into that 6-inch range, and then large portions of northern Virginia in that 1 to 4 inch snowfall range. If we want to just take a broad look at the region, that's what it looks like. You see, Tennessee had some decent snowfall this morning, 6 to possibly 8 inches down there, and then this strip right that is almost a perfect boundary for that trough I was showing you earlier, where we were talking about how where the isobars are closest together, that's where you get your most extreme weather. That's almost a perfect illustration of how that works. Just that strip going from Tennessee through West Virginia and then right through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and into the Atlantic. So always a good thing to look at is where are the impacts expected and what are the impacts going to be. You can see right where we saw that ice is where the moderate to major impacts are expected. So we were questioning at the beginning of the video if those impacts were due to heavy snowfall or ice, and it looks like they're taking into account the half an inch of ice that could be building into this region. Where we have the heavy snowfall, that's where we're just expecting some minor impacts there. And then as you can see, that is going to stretch up into Pennsylvania and New Jersey throughout the next day and then a little bit into tomorrow as well. We'll check out the exact timing right now for what's going on in the Northeast. The first place we have to start is what we've been talking about all week. What path was this low going to take after it moved off North Carolina and Virginia? Because this really determines the weather that the Northeast ends up getting. So if this low moves straight off into the Atlantic, the Northeast doesn't get any snow. If it hugs the coast right here, that's where you're pulling down cold air, pushing in moisture, and the entire Northeast can get a foot of snow with some of our bigger winter storms we've seen throughout the season. So that's what we've been watching throughout this week because the models aren't too good at predicting this more than a day or two out. As you can see, the low is taking kind of a Goldilocks path. And that's the second time I've said that term in this video today, but it's been applicable to a couple different stories. It's kind of taking the middle route between those two. It's not going straight out into the Atlantic, and it's not hugging the coast. It's moving parallel to the coast, but fairly far off. So the reason or the impacts that you're going to get with that, it means that only the coastal cities, or at least closer to the coastal cities, are going to be getting that heavy snow, and then large portions of the Northeast are going to be cold. And that makes sense when you think about the circulation around a low. So it's counterclockwise. So on this left side, you're pulling down cold air. On the right side, you could be pushing in moisture. So when the low is right there along the coast, all that is happening right over your cities. So you're pulling down the cold air, pushing in moisture, and that's what allows heavy snowfall to fall. In this case, the low is so far off that the biggest impacts it has is just bringing down a lot of that cold air. If we see let's go to the temperature highs throughout the day today. You can see almost the entire Northeast in the mid to low 20s. And then as we get into Friday, it looks like the entire Northeast is still below freezing as that low, you can see, continues to pull down that cold air. Looking at Saturday, it looks like it's actually going to get a bit colder as that low moves off and then has the trailing effects of pulling that cold air down. At that point, there are some places in the Northeast that will be getting into the teens. So that's what we've been talking about. And I might have made it seem like there's not going to be a lot of snow in the Northeast by that path that it's taking, but that's just compared to if it had moved right along the coast. Don't get me wrong, there are still some places in the Northeast that are getting some great snowfall, as you see on this map right here. I guess the word great depends on your perspective. If you like weather and exciting weather and winter storms, then this is great snowfall. If you hate the cold, and well, if that's the case, you probably shouldn't be living in the Northeast during winter. But yeah, you get the point. So heavy snowfall building in throughout the day today is not going to last all that long. At least the heavy snowfall is not going to last all that long throughout by tonight and then into early tomorrow morning, that's where we're just getting some light snowfall. And you can see as the low moves off right there, that's where we just have light snowfall throughout almost the entire Northeast. And then we click through, it moves up through Massachusetts, and then finally, it looks like it's going to be missing Maine for the most part as it moves up right there. Yesterday's model had it moving close enough to Maine that they were getting some good snowfall. This model run, which is the more accurate of the two, doesn't look to be the case. So we'll focus on where that snowfall looked to be the greatest. It started coming in early this morning, about 7 a.m. By around this time, 1 p.m. on Thursday, that's where the heaviest snowfall starts to build in to New Jersey and eastern parts of Pennsylvania, getting into New York, and then it's going to turn into light snowfall. It almost seems like it's going away as we get into tonight and early tomorrow morning, and then it comes back tomorrow morning. I believe part of the reason for that is because that's where it'll have pulled down some more cold air in the morning time. That's where your air is colder, so the moisture that is still over the region will be able to fall as snow. 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, should be waking up to some fresh snow, and then that's going to move east and north through Massachusetts, and then finally is gone by 1 a.m. on Saturday. So the first little traces of snow were showing up early this morning, and then let's just click through here till the storm is gone. You can see parts of New Jersey getting 6 to 8 inches, Philadelphia getting 7 inches there, New York City 5.5 inches. So this is certainly still a major, you could call it a major storm. I guess we'll look at the winter storm severity map in a second to see what it actually is considered. But that little strip right there kind of explains what I was trying to illustrate earlier. If that low was closer to the coast, those heavy snow accumulations would be more inland and covering a larger area. But as you can see, there are still spots, especially in New York and New Jersey, that should be getting 5 inches to 8 inches of snow, which is a decent winter storm right there. We'll just take the wide view so you can see everything. Like I said, Maine is missing out on this one. Those heavy snow accumulations are dropping south of Maine right into the Atlantic because that low is moving farther off the coast. But throughout Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, at least 1 to 3 inches, 1 to 2 inches, and then where you're closer to the coast, that's where you get up to 2 to 4, and then if you're in this strip, that's where you can get to 6 to 8. So pretty interesting to see that there, and we'll have to stay updated with that because there is, like I said, that low could still change its path. That's one of the things I believe the models aren't the best at forecasting. So there is still the chance that it decides to move a little bit closer to the coast. So we'll have to keep our eye on it because if it does move closer to the coast, that bullseye of heavy snow might be right over Maine, might be right over Vermont or New Hampshire. Who's to say? So we'll have to keep our eye on that for tomorrow's forecast. So we talked about a lot today. I'll try to summarize it all in about 5 minutes. The big story is most likely what's now being called Winter Storm Viola. That was what was down in Texas yesterday with all the ice and the power outages. That's now moving up through West Virginia, and then is going to work its way into the Northeast. The big concern there is that ice that's going to be in Virginia and North Carolina, and then we're also going to have a strip of heavy snow going from West Virginia through Pennsylvania and New Jersey. New York City should be getting over 5 inches with that. The other big part of the story was the very trailing end of this system is going to be dropping 6 inches of snowfall in southwestern Texas throughout the day today. Major to extreme impacts are expected down there because that is very abnormal weather. The only reason that's even possible is because of that cold Arctic air that I'll show you in a second. The one other thing on this map is that storm system that's going to be pushing into the Pacific Northwest, possibly dropping 1 to 2 feet of snow in Washington, and then maybe a foot in Oregon, and then maybe 10 inches in very northern California. It's a northern storm up there. And then you can see as Winter Storm Viola moves off, and then it looks like for the first time in a while there's not all that much going on throughout the country. Seems like for the last 2 weeks we've had storm after storm after storm, but we'll have to keep our eye on these next two that appear to be coming in to see what those do as we move farther into the forecast. We could play this game forever where we just continue to click through. Again, the other big part of the story and what's allowing that snowstorm to happen all the way down here in Texas is that Arctic blast of cold air. You can see portions of Texas into Oklahoma, even stretching all the way up into the Midwest at some times, are still 35 to 45 degrees below average. This is also at a time when many people in Texas still don't have power, so they don't have heaters. So this cold air is certainly something to take seriously. Now the good news is, while it is bad news that today's still going to be cold, Friday's still going to be cold, and by that I mean mostly below freezing in Texas, as we continue to click forward in the forecast, the warming trend is going to continue. By about Sunday into Monday, we've almost returned to just mild temperatures, and then as we get farther off into the forecast, we actually get into 10 to 15 degree above average temperatures, and it looks like that warming trend should be continuing for the next 2 weeks. If you want to just see a snapshot of that, even though it might be 35 degrees below average, below freezing in Texas right now, this is what you have to look forward to. That warming trend that we are currently feeling, it might not feel like it since it's still so cold, but it is at least warmer than it was 2 days ago. That warming trend should continue for the next 2 weeks, and your 8 to 14 day average has the entire eastern half of the country above average temperatures. So I know it's cold right now, but the end is in sight. It's not going to last much longer. But we do have, or what I should say is, weather forecasts are always subject to change. So don't take my word on this. This is just our best estimate right now. But if you want to stay tuned, you can subscribe to this channel where I do these weather forecasts every single day. If you live in Texas and your power is out, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, and thanks for watching.